What is crackin', everyone? It is Elder Cracker, and today we are going to be talking about 5 potential new classes we could see in Dark and Darker. Now, just as a clarification, none of these classes have been confirmed by the devs. The game has not even came out yet, officially, only playtest. However, there is a very high chance that these classes could be implemented into the game. These are just based on my opinion, and they're going to go in order of least likely to most likely. Starting with the least likely, we have the Artificer, or what we could also call the Treasure Hunter class. Personally, I think this would be a really fun idea. All of these ideas would be fun. However, a Treasure Hunter character based solely on getting into dungeons, looting, and trying to avoid combat would make for an interesting build. Many people do play rogues already because they are fast and agile, and they're faster at opening treasure chests, which helps acquire more loot, and they're more stealth based so they can get away from combat and escape, making extra money. It would be really interesting to see a class based purely around that. And if you have ever played D&D, the Artificer also makes use out of items, bringing out more potential in each item they use. The reason why I put this at the least likely is because all of the other classes already in Dark and Darker are capable of defending themselves on their own. I do not know how you would make an Artificer or a Treasure Hunter combat worthy. If you have played D&D, Artificers use magic as well, but that magic is more utility based. And I would find it quite difficult to see how they'd be able to give them weapons where they could defend themselves without being too broken, in the sense that they could also fight plus have amazing looting skills. I could see how this class could thrive against PvE mobs, maybe having sets of skills that help it avoid monsters or have monsters aggro to other characters in the party if there is one. However, it would fall extremely weak against other players. Another cool benefit would be having potions grant more health than their default if the Artificer is using them, since they know how to make more out of their items. The same thing with invisibility potions and shield potions. This would be a very niche class, and most people would probably play it just to rank up their stash, go on the market, sell the product, and then use that currency for their other characters. Coming in at number 4 would have to be the Bard. If you have ever played For the King, Dungeons & Dragons, the Bard is a very common occurrence in many RPG games, as they are purely focused on the support role. Unlike the Cleric, which has some decent combat capabilities in Dark and Darker, this class would take the support to a whole new level, providing strong buffs to their team, as well as some small heals as well. But their combat would be extremely nullified. Again, the reason why I would put this one slightly higher than the Treasure Hunter is it can provide group utility, and that's about it. The Bard can provide group utility, but it would really fall short in finding a way to make it PvP oriented, and it would need a group for it to function. I do not know if Dark and Darker devs plan on having classes who are dependent on other players to be played. For example, you can see a wizard walking around by themselves, same thing with a rogue, same thing with a fighter. I could not see a bard managing the dungeons of Dark and Darker by themselves. However, it would be very cool, and it would really fit the fantasy niche, having a loot playing character who can provide strong buffs to their team, and although you would only really see them in group teams, they would help with compositions extremely. So coming in at number
it was just called Dark and Darker.
3
The newer one was called
is the
Death Note 3.
Warlock. Now, the Warlock is more of a darker type of wizard and would focus more on debuffs rather than the buffs that the wizard would have. I feel like in order for the wizard and the warlock to coexist in Dark and Darker, you would need to have a clear differential. So the differential would be that Warlock is primarily focused on debuffing enemies, while the Wizard has the few abilities it has right now, such as Ignite and Haste, that provide buffs for their team. Other than that, the elemental magic probably would be similar. They could find darker alternatives for the magic that is similar to the Wizard, just maybe with a different animation. The reason why I put this one at number 3 is I feel like it would be difficult to make an appearance different from a Warlock or a Wizard. One thing that Dark and Darker does really well, with the exception of maybe Rogue and Ranger, is that it's really easy to differentiate what class you're about to go against based on how when you see them. If you see a naked fuck with a giant beard, there's a good chance it's a Barbarian. If you see a guy with a bow, there's a good chance it's a Ranger. If you saw a Wizard and a Warlock and you saw both of them holding a staff, it would be hard to differentiate which one is which. And that might cause a little conflict. However, that might be benign in the grand scheme of things, and it could play as an advantage for the Wizard and Warlock classes, adding a sense of unpredictableness to their class. Coming in at number 2,
It was just called Dark and Darker.
I'm going to call the Guardian. Now, the Guardian isn't exactly a class in D&D. However, the main gist of it would to be a fighter-like class solely built on defense. They would gain buffs from using heavy armor, as well as instead of using a normal kite shield, they would have access to tower shields, which would make them extremely slow units. They would not be very mobile, and that's the kind of the downside to them, is they have increased health, increased protection from armor. They're very good defensively. However, in sense of pursuits and outmaneuvering their opponent, they fall extremely poorly. They cannot keep up with teammates. They cannot. That's like the one downside to them. I think this is a very possible class. The reason being is that the fighter class in Dark and Darker and in Dungeons and Dragons is already a very flexible class. It's a jack of all trades, master of none. I could totally see them focusing a class on one end of the spectrum being all out defense. Sure, a fighter could clad on some heavy armor and have a decent shield to basically be a tank, but I think it would be interesting to have a class that has exclusive shields such as the tower shield and gains buffs from using heavy armor in order to be almost like a tank. Since there aren't really any tank classes, unless you want to argue maybe cleric, but I would say that he's more of a defensive support than anything. Now, the most likely class I could see being implemented in Dark and Darker is the Monk. Now, if you haven't seen my video about the Monk build on the Cleric, this one's going to be a little bit different. So, the Monk class would focus purely on martial arts. They would have some magical abilities to help with their physical power. However, for the most part, the class would be all about unarmed combat. I think that's such a fun idea, and so little games tend to appeal to the unarmed build that some people like to use. This could totally be a new class idea, as it creates a unique sense of gameplay, and many people would be drawn to it as well. Just look at unarmed builds that you see in Skyrim and Oblivion. You know, some people want to be able to incapacitate their opponents with, calf kicks rather than having to use a sword all the time. It would create a new sense of gameplay where you're not focused too much on the loot, because the Monk would probably thrive off of having very little light armor, high movement. I think there's already so many items in the game that are leading towards a potential Monk class anyway, that it would just be really easy to implement. And like I said, so many players would love to have a Monk build. You know how many people would love to cheese in Dark and Darker servers just by dropping in with a whole team of monks all unarmed, and you think that, oh, they just have unarmed and they just beat the shit out of you? And those are the 5 classes that I think could be put in the game. Again, none of these are confirmed. The game's not even out yet. These are just some fun predictions I could see, and likely predictions, and as well as ones I would like to see as well. I think some of these have a very high chance. There's some that I'm not as optimistic about being implemented. I think it'd be really cool if they were. However, this one's mainly for fun. As always, I want you guys to have a big dong and prosper, and if you like this type of content, hit up that subscribe button and smash that like button too. And as always, I'll see you guys next time. Elder Cracker out.